Hello, and welcome to my presentation on the Mass portions of the Leonard Bernstein website. Information on the Mass can be found in two areas on this website. One, the research section, will cover second. The first section we'll cover is the composer section. If you click on the composer link and navigate to the menu on the left side of the page, you'll find an entry on the Mass. This is a rather extensive article, and it's worth covering separately because it makes several points which are not included in the research section of the website. To begin with, in the sidebar on the right side, there are several quotes from newspapers regarding the Mass, as well as a presentation of available recordings. These newspaper quotes are not cited very well, often with only the title of the newspaper and no date, so it can be very hard to track them down. In the main article, we find that there is a trailer of the Mass, which is quite interesting to watch. It gives you an idea of the visual aesthetic of the production, as well as a few samples of the music. Second, this article provides us with more context to the socio-political situation which led to Bernstein's creation of this piece, having to do with faith in wartime. Further, this article has some information having to do with the collaboration of Bernstein with Stephen Schwartz, the composer of Godspell. Third, this article offers us a little more information about the eclecticism of the piece. It offers us this quote: "The eclecticism of Mass's music reflects the multifaceted nature of Bernstein's career, with blues, rock, gospel, folk, Broadway, and jazz idioms appearing side by side with 12-tone serialism, symphonic marches, solemn hymns, Middle Eastern dances, orchestral meditations, and lush chorales, all united in a single dramatic event with recurring musical motifs." Finally, this article covers some of the controversy which surrounded the premiere of this piece, and goes on to elaborate that the acceptance of this piece has increased over time, with many of the objections being turned into praise. Finally, and I think the most important aspect of this article, is the detailed synopsis at the bottom. This is quite useful as there is not a synopsis elsewhere in the research section. There are also musical examples here with the synopsis, but I could not find a way to make them play. Perhaps you had better luck. Next, let's move to the research section. The research section has 5 subtopics. They are overview, letters, scores, publications, and working notes. The overview section is very brief. It has 4 major points. It first discusses parallels with Bernstein's symphony Kaddish, saying how both of these works are linked to President Kennedy, and secondly, how they're both focused on exploration of faith. It offers us this comment: "Like Mass, Kaddish evokes a universal sense of anguish over hope and faith, as well as the particularly Jewish practice of occasionally addressing God in confrontational terms, through its narrator who speaks the text written in English by Bernstein." It goes on to discuss this theme of faith, and explores it through juxtaposition of liturgy versus English text, and different styles of music. Third, it discusses the political issues surrounding the premiere of this event, such as President Nixon declining to attend. And finally, it briefly discusses the massive performing forces needed to put on this production. In the letters section, we find 2 letters reproduced in their entirety. The first is from the Bishop of New York. He relates how much he enjoyed the performance and how he identified with the issues that the celebrant struggles with. He also comments how he used Mass in one of his sermons and encloses a copy of the sermon for Bernstein. Unfortunately, that is not reproduced here. The second letter is from the setting designer, Oliver Smith, and it's a glowing letter of appreciation at having collaborated with Bernstein on this production. I couldn't locate either of these letters in the online portion of the Library of Congress website, but I do suspect that they come from the Library of Congress. They're simply not online. The second letter is found in the Leonard Bernstein letters. These letters may be a little biased, as they're both very positive. However, I suspect that most of the correspondence that Bernstein would have received personally would have been very positive. Under the scores heading, we find 4 musical examples. Each of these thumbnails can be enlarged to show us a full page of Bernstein's working scores. While none of these are dated, one might assume that they come from the 2-week period when he was collaborating with Stephen Schwartz. Burton tells us that he went from sketches to a near-completed project during this time. To elaborate on a few of the examples, if we look at the second one, the notes tell us that Paul Simon gave these lyrics as a gift to Leonard Bernstein. Burton tells us that, more specifically, the rights to the lyrics were given as a Christmas gift to Bernstein because he wanted to use them in his Mass. The notes here also elaborate a little on the third example, telling us that it was set as rock and roll. If we look at the working score, we can see that Bernstein notates amplified in the margin, indicating that he probably had this intention from the time when he wrote out this first draft. The fourth example is a setting of simple song, one of the main themes of this piece. It was changed only slightly between this first version and the final version, a couple of the words. Other than that, the dynamic markings are correct, the accompaniment and the melody all remain the same. All of these examples are very similar to the final version, and they can provide slight insights into Bernstein's process as he worked from beginning to end. Unfortunately, without dates, we don't know exactly how they fit into this process. And again, the website neglects to tell us the source of these scores. I can only assume they came from the Library of Congress also. In the publication sections, we find 3 items reproduced in their entirety. It's a little odd because they each deal with different things. The first publication being a review of the 1972 Columbia recording, the second publication being the New York Times review of the original production, and the third publication being a sermon that was preached by a reverend based on his attendance of the Mass. The first publication is very positive, and the reviewer writes, "Mass functions as an extremely sophisticated, carefully controlled musical entity that repays close scrutiny." He follows this with a detailed synopsis analyzing how the musical elements play into his interpretation of the work. The second, the New York Times review, is quite negative, and in fact it's reproduced on the composer article with a link to the original article. The third item, the sermon, I thought was quite interesting to include, but it makes more sense given the Shepherd article and Bernstein's comment within that he received many sermons based upon his Mass. This seems to provide a balanced representation of the different receptions of Mass, as we know that there were many highly critical reviews and also many positive reviews. And I appreciate that at the top of each of these is information allowing you to retrace its origin. Finally, we have the working notes section. In this section there are 7 examples. These are not quite as useful as the scores because these small thumbnails can't be expanded. However, sometimes there are much more extensive commentary which seem to reproduce what might have been on the page. It's not super clear though, so it's a little confusing. Also be careful, the commentary for note 4 is actually with note 5, and the commentary for note 5 is actually with note 4. Little error on their part, I suppose. In any case, these are very interesting to look at. I think the most interesting thing is that Father Dan is mentioned 4 times. We know from the Shepherd article that Burton's account may not be accurate. So, it makes us wonder exactly what contribution Father Dan had to this piece. It seems to be implied that Bernstein met with Father Dan more than once, but it's not made clear whether that's the case or not. Regardless, these notes are fascinating, but hard to use because they're so small and what is actually Bernstein's work is not made clear in the commentary. Also, they neglect to mention the source of these working notes once again. And so that leads us to our final analysis of how useful these materials are for research. Let's begin by thinking about the audience they're geared toward. Honestly, I really think it's geared towards a general audience rather than a scholarly one. Most of the documents don't have a source cited. that's problematic for scholarship. Further, a lot of the commentary is uncited as well, so without knowing who produced it, it's hard to cite it and feel confident about it. That being said, the working scores are absolutely a useful resource to somebody who's unable to visit the Library of Congress. Likewise with the working notes. In terms of publications, you can probably find just as much, if not more, material in a simple Google Scholar search. In terms of the letters, at least one of the letters is unique to the resources that I tried to locate them in. So that's great. It gives you another unique primary source to reference. So all that being said, some of these materials are very useful, some are moderately useful, and others not really useful at all. But we have to commend the Leonard Bernstein site for their effort, because it's absolutely a great resource for people interested in learning about the Mass. I hope you enjoyed this, the final presentation that you'll have to critique for class. See you soon.